Hello, viewers. Welcome to UMD Media Show. UMD Media works on understanding, measuring, and doing. Uh, Apologize for the late show today. We have had technical issues. Hopefully, those who were waiting for us on the other link would find their way to this link. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Those who are following us on all these platforms, please share, like, so that many can access this material. Hopefully, we'll also get this one starting maybe this show on satellite to the Horn of Africa. So we are working on that and we'll announce soon, maybe sometime this week. Today, we will be talking about the state of play in Oromia and beyond. And my guest is not a new guest to UMD Media, it's Dr. Tagai Ararsa. Dr. Tagai, welcome again to UMD Media.
Thank you, Gish. Thanks for having me again.
Great. I'm sure there is a lot to talk about, and what I did before this show was to collect if there are questions from our viewers, and I was just hoping to get one, maximum two, but I received a lot of questions. But we'll go to the viewers' questions later on. So let's start with the topic itself. So where are we in terms of where Oromia is now? We have had shows on this with different guests, including yourself, maybe months ago. But given the dynamics, given what's happening in Oromia and in the country in general, that's why we have this beyond as well. So, what is your assessment? If you were to paint a picture of where we are now, what would that picture look like, Dr. Tagai?
Well, the picture is one of a state that is at war. As you know, there has been a 1 month long military operation launched by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces in early April. And that operation has failed to achieve its intended goal. The intended goal was to eradicate the Oromo Liberation Army altogether and relegate them into the dustbin of history. That's how they had framed it from the regime side. And that has not been possible because of the resistance, strong resistance put up by the Oromo Liberation Army, which very much surprised the Ethiopian National Defense Force. They have deployed about 70,000 strong, I hear, to make sure that that operation will be successful, and that didn't materialize. And as a consequence, they are now planning for another offensive, another operation, which they call the last of the last. It's the የመጨረሻው መጨረሻ. So they want to continue to do that while also making some signs of some gestures of interest to negotiate with other forces. They are still continuing to do an offensive in Oromia. In the last offensive, we had so much humanitarian crisis, and because I also work closely with an Oromo humanitarian organization named JIRA, I kind of mobilize funds and disperse to the people who are affected by the latest attacks, drone attacks. It could be, atrocities in the villages and so on and so forth. Mainly this month, we have been busy with mobilizing medical relief fund for people who have been affected by the war. And so there has been a lot of people, civilians, who have been affected by the recent offensive, because every time they have they face a strong resistance from the OLA, the government forces go into the towns and they attack civilian population, and they do so indiscriminately. They arrest the young men when they find them. They torture the women and the children to divulge information about the young men that are not at home. because they suspect that they have joined the Oromo Liberation Army. It has been a gruesome month of so many atrocities in different places, massacres in the central region in Shoa, in Adabarga, for example, in Jaldu, and so on and so forth. That's where the war was very intensified. And in the southern areas in Borana and Guji zone, there is a more stiff kind of Oromo Liberation Army resistance. But there was also an attempt to attack from the different regions, from the side of the Somali region, from the side of the Sidama region, from the side of the southern region. And again, the ramification is only that killing more civilians, destroying more civilian towns, and sometimes just for the sake of reporting that they have attacked OLF Shani, OLA, that's how they frame it, and they just kill a number of people and say, today we have killed this number of OLA soldiers. In the West, the offensive didn't bring much result, but the West has been a besieged area. In Wulaga, for example, it's besieged because there was an attempt to attack from the border side of the Amhara region. And so that attack kind of displaces many civilians to leave their homes and to go into the jungle. And when they go into the forest, they are hounded down by the Ethiopian National Defense Force as the Oromo Liberation Army fighters. When they stay in the city, the special forces and militia operating from the Amhara region side basically attack them for calling them OLA. And the result is that people simply live in a very difficult situation of siege. And meantime, the invaders come and, drive so many cattle, destroy properties, and loot and pillage villages, and that continues to stay there. The ugly thing about the Western Front is that roads are closed between, for example, Gidda, Yana, Kiramu, etc., and Nakamte, which means that people who have been affected by the war and have been victimized by atrocities cannot access medical services in the town areas. And so the same tactic of putting a particular territory under siege and exposing them to a humanitarian crisis and making it difficult for the survivors to survive, they think they can basically subject the Oromo Liberation Army and force into difficulties and force them to surrender. And of course, this has been a clearly articulated program. It is not like attacking civilians is not happening as a matter of, as an offshoot of normal operations. It's not casualties created as what is it called, collateral. It's not a collateral damage. This has been pre-planned, and they have said that in order to completely eradicate the Oromo Liberation Army, we need to make sure that the pool is drained. The pool is the Oromo civilian population, and therefore you have to attack them. So what they do is they attack civilians, they destroy towns, they destroy harvests on farmlands, and then they destroy. This is funny. They set jungles on fire because they think that's where the Oromo Liberation Army is hiding, and this has really created a lot of problem on the civilian population in these three major fronts that the Oromo Liberation Army has for long been resisting against the Ethiopian government. Apart from that, at the center, as you know, the political space is closed. Oromo political parties are completely out of the political space, meaning they have not taken part in the election, therefore they have not been part of the parliament. But most of the leaders, almost all, you could say the political leaders have been in detention or in house arrest. And recently there has been an improvement on that side As you know, some of the OFC leaders, Oromo Federalist Congress Party leaders, Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Gerba, and Hamza Borana, and some of the notable ones have been released. Daoud Ifsa from the OLF, Oromo Liberation Front, has been also, I think they have kind of relaxed the restrictions that came with the house arrest. He can move around, I suppose, but we haven't confirmed this. And then there are two leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front who have been in prison for a long time now, and for no offense, for no crime that the prosecutor has framed so far. They were arrested and detained extrajudicially, and they have been through lots of difficulties during the stay in the different jails, and these are Bateur Gesa and Colonel Gamechu Ayana. These two have been released, and we have seen their pictures thrown around on social media, and in fact, some of them have been also in touch with Jawar himself, and we have seen those pictures on the scene. The other thing we see is that the Oromo Federalist Congress seems to have kind of blunted its stiff resistance against the regime. It seems to be calling more for kind of a truce. In fact, in their resolutions, several times they have said that as the government tries to lower down its arms and start talking to the TDF to negotiate some humanitarian access, they should also start negotiating with the Oromo Liberation Army. They have been on record saying this. Dr. Marara has been on record saying this. And in that regard, it is not that new. But on the other hand, while also the OFC, while also being extremely critical of the National Dialogue Commission that was set up and the dialogue that is called for by the government, they now seem to be saying, we just have to find a way to negotiate with Abiy Ahmed. I think the interest towards regime change seems to have blunted, and Jawar's media stunt since release last week is more or less in line with that. And of course, it has created some noise everywhere. And the situation seems to be the same. On the other hand, the economic situation is very dire. The unrest, and basically the region is for a large part ungovernable. Ungovernable not because there is a civil protest, a civil resistance, but mainly because the three major areas of Oromia, the west, the center, and the south, are under virtually war for a long time now, for almost 3 years. And the economic situation is very dire. As you remember, there has been drought in Borana, Bali, Guji area. There have been famine, and nobody really, it is the underreported tide of famine in RC, Western RC, and so on and so forth. And we only had to rely on contributions from some Oromos and mobilize funds to support those places. And in Wollo, similar siege is there. And so the economic situation, the humanitarian crisis, the hunger, the famine, and the fabricated and the naturally famine that has come about because of the drought are there. And the fear is, even now, the government could not provide, supply enough fertilizers for the farm this year to the farmers. And it has been, what has been provided, supplied, has been very expensive. And the fear is that the farmers are not, planting seeds this year. They are not sowing seeds. They are not farming, which means next year is going to be an even worse disaster in terms of food supply. So these are the kind of things that we have. The inflation of the Ethiopian birr is just skyrocketing. The price hike is there, and life has become almost unlivable, especially in the cities and in the town areas. So this is the situation. In short, Oromia is still at war. Nothing has changed, and that's where we are.
That green picture, you mentioned a couple of times at least a number of political actors in Oromia. So OFC, OLF, OLA, and of course PP, Oromia PP, the Prosperity Party, the ruling party. So here is a question from a viewer. Can you outline? So this is about understanding the values, if there is any difference in what they want, how they frame the politics and the values, the principles behind them. So any difference in the core values of OFC, OLF, OLA, how they frame the Oromo issue, and maybe how they want, if there is any change in that.
Yeah. The difference between OLA and OLF is not in terms of a difference in aspiration or in political program and objective. It is a strategic difference, a tactical difference. That is, the OLF, which is in the city, seems to pursue a peaceful political exercise as a way to achieving the goals that the OLF stands for. So they have the peaceful political resistance strategy that they have adopted for themselves since 2018, when they returned from exile in Eritrea. The OLA, as you know, as you remember, is a group that refused to disarm without a clear roadmap about the future, about the content of the agreement between the OLF and the government. And of course, that content is still a mystery. And the result is the people who had been armed at the time, when the government called for an unconditional disarmament in a very incomplete, inarticulate process of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, that group said, no, we have no guarantee about the possibility of transiting to democracy in the absence of a clear roadmap and a clear terms of agreement. And as a consequence of that, they stuck to their guns literally, and they stayed in the jungle. And the government's chosen way of dealing with them is to disarm them by force. And as you know, a number of people, Oromo politicians, came together to discuss the issue and to work some solutions in collaboration with the government, and that didn't go anywhere. And the more this is happening, and the more military offensives were launched from the side of the government, the more the OLA was becoming, popular. The more young men and women flew to. We saw that more young men and women flying to join the OLA, and from a handful of armed people, we now have in tens of thousands of conscripts trained, armed, and operating in different parts of the country. Today, it is a force to reckon with. Any kind of deal to the future, peace deal to the future today, cannot be achieved without taking into account the significance of the OLA. Now, what is the aspiration of the OLA, the OLF, at which they converge, you asked? These groups, these parties, well, they are also one and two in some sense, because the OLA was part of the OLF for years, but it is the part of the OLA that could not trust the regime's stride towards transitional democracy. So because they emerge from the same political program, they still operate from the same political program. In terms of aspirations, they are both one and the same. So in terms of aspirations, they all want to work towards achieving self-determination for the Oromo public. Achieving self-determination means regaining collective agency as a population, collective agency and to decide on their political, economic, and social destiny as it is enshrined in the United Nations Charter, in the United Nations Bill of Rights, in the Ethiopian Constitution. So those are the same. The difference between them is a difference of strategy and tactic. How do we achieve those goals? One says through peaceful political resistance, and the other says through armed struggle. The group that says through armed struggle only we can achieve that aspiration says so because the government is completely armed and they are taking offensive, and we have no guarantee that their politics is demilitarized. We have no guarantee that this is going to be a democracy. Indeed, time has proved proved that Abiy's regime is nothing like a democratic regime. It actually became a genocidal, warmongering regime that has caused the death and suffering of millions in the Horn of Africa. Abiy's regime has become the cause of instability in the entire region. So the difference between these two is, achieving self-determination, regaining collective agency, and determining our people's destiny, political destiny, including all the questions that are raised in Ethiopia. Do we want to stay with Ethiopia, or do we want to separate? Are we in or are we out? These things have to be determined by the people after the people have achieved their collective agency and after a certain kind of referendum is done, or at least if politics is done in accordance with the human rights provisions of the Ethiopian constitution that was in place for ages. Okay, so those, in that regard, they have no difference. The only difference is the group that wants to pursue the peaceful resistance way trusted too much of Abiy's regime's claim or interest at the time, expressed interest to make a reform and to change the political system into a democratic one. And of course, that hasn't happened. Their political space is now closed. They have not been part of the political space. They have not been part of the election. They didn't even agree about the way the election was conducted. And their leaders have been arrested. They have not been actually doing any political activity. So now what they are left with is to operate from the margins of the political space, from outside of the political space, to push the regime to allow them to get into the political space, which means to pressure the regime to relax its rules and to allow at least a democratic process that can include all the political parties. But before all that is achieved, even they now seem to call first and foremost for cessation of hostilities, for ending the war, and for bringing about peace that will lead.
I think you are breaking. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? But I can't hear you. I don't know why. Let me see if it's the same for our audience, for our viewers. Yeah, they can't hear you as well. Yeah, you cut off. So is that maybe your speaker? Okay, for those who join us late, we are talking about the state of play, the state of affairs in Oromia and beyond. And my guest today is Dr. Tsagay Ararsa. We are covering the situation, the current affairs in Oromia right now. And we have received a number of questions. I'm not sure if you can cover all, but we have received a number of questions from our viewers. And Dr. Tsagay will join us back. In the meantime, we are live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So please, those who are following us everywhere, share so that we get more viewers and like, so that the algorithm of YouTube and the other platforms spreads the word, so to speak. We have now a technical issue, and Dr. Zagay is fixing his mic, and we'll see if we can get him back on this. Keep sharing, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we are on the effort of getting UMD media on satellite, and some of the programs we have done so far, they might be on a test drive this week or next week. So they will be on satellite to the Horn of Africa in the coming days. This is a test drive, and we'll see how that goes. So today we are talking about the state of play in Oromia and beyond. Some of the questions we received, they are related to Oromia, Oromo political parties, the recent interview by Jawar, and we have received a number of questions on that, and we will hear what Dr. Zagay's take is on that. And we have received a number of questions as well on the Oromia Tigray, OLA-TDF, and we will entertain that as well. But we had technical issues when we start. I apologize for that, and we are still having that issue as we speak. Let's see how that goes. Can you hear me, Dr. Zagay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So,
Great.
yeah. So maybe you want to wrap up on that, so we'll quickly go through the number of questions we received.
Very good. Yeah, there is only one small point to add. So the
Okay.
difference between OLA and OLF is very clear. No difference in aspirations and goals and visions. There is only a difference in terms of strategy and tactics. And of course, which one fares better is a different story altogether. The difference between OLF, OLA continuum, I see them as a continuum, on the one hand, and the Oromo Federalist Congress is a difference also in aspiration. The difference is that the OFC seeks self-determination within Ethiopia. Okay, self-determination within Ethiopia. The Oromo Federalist Congress, as you know from the past, it's composed of ONC, Oromo National Congress, and Oromo Federalist Democratic Movement. And those groups want their social democratic parties. As social democratic parties, they have been calling for an inclusive government, elite power sharing, national unity government that will also achieve social justice, i.e., representation, redistribution, and recognition of cultural identities. They do subscribe to the right to self-determination, but the right to self-determination that they subscribe to is an internal one. And this has been made clear by Dr. Merera several times. And so theirs is a more modest, a less ambitious aspiration. All they want is within the existing federal framework, A, if it is a genuine federalism, B, if it is democratic, C, if it is a system in which there will be sufficient degree of power sharing among the elite, and because of that power sharing, if there comes about a national consensus, general national consensus. How do we achieve that power sharing among elites? Through, among others, proportional representation electoral system. And this has been the claim of Dr. Merera for a long time. It has been also part of his scholarship, and this is what OFC stands for. So it's not just a difference in terms of tactic. Of course, its tactic and strategy has always been a peaceful strategy. And that peaceful strategy have always put pressure on the government to bring together all stakeholders, all political parties, all political actors in one national unity government in which we can establish a country-wide consensus, because the term national consensus is not very much appropriate for Ethiopia because there are many nations. We can only say country-wide consensus. So that has been their line, and they stuck to that line, and they also negotiate their freedom, their space with the regime, because most of the time they are also attacked when they are really resistance. They are attacked as being OLFites, So they have been negotiating their space for a long time. Jawar Mohammed, the very famous activist, identified very closely with the Cairo movement of the 2015 to 2018, had no parties before, but since the attempt on his life, that assassination attempt on his life, he was forced to join a political party, and he has joined Merera in the group as a member of the ONC. And recently, after he came out of the prison, he was elected by the party to become the deputy, one of the deputy leaders of the Oromo Federalist Congress. So the difference between these two, basically there are two parties. One goes for internal self-determination, the other goes for full self-determination. The OLF, OLA continuum, the right side of the OLA, OLF, or the left side, if you like, from where you stand, continuum basically wants not just a full self-determination, but also, because that aspiration to achieve a full self-determination for the Oromo nation cannot be achieved within the political space now, and because we are at war, and there is, of course, the fundamental intrinsic violence tied to the Ethiopian state form from the time of occupation of Oromia in the last century. Because there is a structural violence, to undo that violence, you can only work from a position of armed resistance. That's one. The second is, at the moment, since 2019, Oromia is at war with the regime. These are political forces that came together mainly to make sure that Oromia is dismantled. The region called Oromia is dismantled. Federalism is dismantled. Recognition of multinational rights to collective rights to self-determination is abolished, and particularly the Oromia region has to be abolished. That's some of the mantra from the governing coalition in power now. So because this group is resisting against the governing coalition, they are not just fighting the current onslaught on the peoples of Oromia. They are fighting for keeping hope alive, for keeping the aspirations of the Oromo people alive, and also to make sure that the decolonization project, the project of undoing an empire that has an intrinsic violence built into the empire state that Ethiopia is, has to continue. So this is the aspirations that they have. Those are the differences, and in some form it is two, but it can be also three.
Thank you. That brings me to the next question. You mentioned a couple of times Jawar. Maybe before going that, because we received a number of questions on that, what is the state of the Oromo diaspora activism? That's a question we received as well. Is it realigning or adjusting in a way? Where are we in terms of that activism? Is one of the questions we received.
Well, the Oromo diaspora has been a little disoriented since particularly the 2018. Part of the reason is they thought the change that came about was the change pushed for by the Oromo Kero, and the fact that the regime has changed its leadership. Many people thought is to Oromo's advantage, and they had hopes that some of the questions of the protest movement will be addressed properly. And obviously, soon after Abiy Ahmed came to power, it became clear that that is not going to happen. And it was only a matter of months before they fall out, even the regime falls out with the leader of the protest movement, the symbolic leader of protest movement, Jawar Mohammed, and they started to hound him for assassination and so on and so forth. The Oromo public then was a little confused for some time. And after Hachalu was assassinated and after all the Oromo political leaders have been arrested, there was an extraordinary rage among the Oromo diaspora. There was a rage, trauma. It was really, I think it will be remembered as a time where Oromos actually received a very powerful blow to their sense of national pride when that happened. In my view, at that time, I went on media and said, tonight, the last bridge between Ethiopia and Oromia is broken, because Jawar went to prison while calling for a peaceful, negotiated transition. Hachalu was assassinated while singing songs of national unity, singing songs of how Oromo can redeem Ethiopia. Oromon biyya jaaramale, Oromon biyya diigare, xiqqaas gabbarre guddaa kanarra maal goonare. You know, we have given small, we have given large, we have given all. What more can we do? Does the Oromo, as we have been accused for centuries as the others of the Ethiopian state, does the Oromo want to dismantle Ethiopia, or does Oromo want to rebuild Ethiopia? And in those days, in the aftermath of the change of regime, the change of government, Hachalu was so optimistic and hopeful that for once we will show that Oromos can also know how to govern and rebuild the country on a just and fairer basis. That wasn't meant to be. For me, that day, the hope of redeeming the empire, the hope of rebuilding it on a new foundation, on a new fairer and just foundation, was completely dashed. And if Ethiopia cannot take Jawar, if Ethiopia cannot take Hachalu, then there is no Oromo that they can take. That's why the term Tikkas Gabbarre Gudda We gave small, we gave large, we gave all. What more can we give anymore? That was the song, the lines of Hachalu's song. From that day on, I said, it is a huge date of tragedy for the entire nation across the globe, including in the diaspora, because they didn't know what hit them. Because the most modest Ethiopianist form of Oromo was targeted on that day. And so they came in droves for 2-3 months. Almost every day there was a protest all over the world, in Europe, in the United States, in North America, and in Australia. But then, after a while, it plummeted and it kind of fizzled out. And then the war in Tigray started. And then it kind of took the headlines everywhere. And then the Tigrayan diaspora intensified its protest rallies across the globe. And then the Oromos, the Ethiopians, the other Ethiopians were also doing their part of the protest against the Tigrayan diaspora, the Oromo diaspora, and again supporting the regime. And the Oromo didn't know how to react now, because when we were attacked, nobody else spoke. And when they are attacked, now their issues take headlines, and they didn't know what to do. And remember, during the protest movement for a long time, the Oromo youth have been protesting against the TPLF-led EPRDF. And so they kind of fear, so are we now standing with the same group that we have been criticizing before, the same group that we have been protesting against? That created a lot of dissonance and a lot of disorientation. So they kind of stayed away. They didn't know exactly what to do, and they fizzled out. After that, now, after a lot of pressure put up on the regime by the TDF and the Oromo Liberation Army, Abiy had to concede his defeat by making gestures, by releasing some of the Oromo leaders from prison. All right. And when this release of prisoners started, and again, people became hopeful, and they didn't know as to whether they want to celebrate that moment, because these are people who were not supposed to be in jail in the first place. So they didn't know whether they have to celebrate the moment, or they had to intensify the protest, because the country was still at war. Yes, a handful of prisoners are released, but the Oromia region is still under a state of war. And secondly, the political propaganda against Oromos, Oromia, and Oromuma did not relent. It did not change. So people kind of were caught in between a celebratory mood and a mood of resistance. So that disorientation and disaffection can, I think, characterize the Oromo diaspora public. And so the most disaffected part of Oromos basically had been disillusioned with anything that has to do with Ethiopia. And so they had to support the Oromo Liberation Army. So those do not believe in protest rallies, because there is no difference that you make by protesting, that they said. So we need to mobilize our resources, our capacities to support the Oromo Liberation Army. So they do organize themselves and do support the Oromo Liberation Army massively. Not enough, in my view, not even 1% of what needs to be supported has been done, but they are supporting it. Again, on the side of protest rallies and so on and so forth, advocacy and diplomacy, it looks like the Oromo has gone into the realm of despair. We have despaired on the international community, on the international media. I think the international community seems to buy the line that the Ethiopian state has for ages propagated, the line that othered the Oromo and the other peoples of Ethiopia. And so they don't give sufficient attention to that. And the Oromo public don't see any point in really putting up advocacy, diplomacy, rally, and protests and events and so on and so forth. Partly because they have seen how the Tigrayan issue has been brought up to the international stage and has been discussed over 15 times in the United Nations alone, and has had no traction. And so there is that sense of despair in the capacity of the international community to make a difference. As a result, people just to the extent they can, they are doing two things now. One, they support the Oromo Liberation Army. Two, they mobilize funds to address the humanitarian issues that are unfolding in Oromia. And so that's where we are. And the Oromo public, of course, has a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, but again, disoriented in terms of political action and despair in the international community.
Great. So let's talk about perhaps a new dynamics maybe unfolding or not. We'll hear from you. So, what is your take of Jar's interview? Some are framing it as pro-center, and you are also mentioning, alluding to the fact that OFC has a difference in the aspirations compared to OLF, OLA, all that. And some questions we received actually went into the details of the content of his interview. Among others, a viewer says why Jawar didn't mention Tigray genocide, man-made famine, Eritrea's involvement, all that. And the viewer actually speculates, is there any Jawar Abiy plot for making Abiy stay in power and maybe then transfers it to Jawar? And this same viewer even goes to the extent of, is the US grooming Jawar? All these details in the questions from our viewers. So let's talk about your take of the interview, and then on the ramifications, what's next, all that, we'll come back to that.
Yes, I have always been clear on this, that OFC is an Ethiopianist party. OFC is not an Oromo nationalist party. Oromo nationalism is an input towards achieving a more just, a fairer Ethiopia, a more equal, a more inclusive, a more peaceful, a more democratic, a fairer Ethiopia. So it is like trying to improve Ethiopia through Oromia. Otherwise, it is one of the centrist parties that, of course, realizes that there is a deficit of social justice and democracy in that country. They still believe that the national question has not been properly addressed. They still believe that the social justice questions have not been addressed. They still believe that government legitimacy believe that politics in Ethiopia is not demilitarized. They still believe that Ethiopia is not fair, not just, not democratic, not in recognition of its plurality. They have that. But their solution is social democracy. And they don't believe in the decolonization idea thesis because they don't think Ethiopia is a colony. And there's a legitimate reason for saying that, and you can have a disagreement with that. So because of this, you don't expect much radical kind of claim from someone who is leading the Oromo Federalist Party. All right, so you wouldn't expect a very, very fiery, radical opposition leader from Jawar. Reason is, his party is not that in the very first place. And in fact, my question to him the day he joined OFC was, look, you started your career by saying I'm Oromo first, and OFC is an Ethiopia first party, for God's sake. And how are you going to make this too much, was the question. But he has made a choice, made a decision. And of course, Jawar, you know him, he's a very pacifist fellow. He has been talking about negotiation through and through from the very start. For every solution, for every problem in Ethiopia, he has been saying negotiation is the key. That's the entry point, and nothing new. I was only expecting a more docile, a more party line keeping a Jawar that will be keeping party lines and so on and so forth. But he went further than that. At least his party, we assumed, always Jawar also, he starts things with Oromia. He's an Oromo nationalist who has paid so much price because of that, to the extent of losing his life. I mean, he's the one person that the entire media establishment and Ethiopian political class literally wanted him to die. I mean, there is a media outlet which invite him for an interview, and don't you think if you die, it was better than other people die in support of you? I mean, this is the only person who experienced this, and that's all because he is a Jawar Mohammed, and he is an Oromo, and he is a Muslim, the quintessential other of Ethiopia. Now, and that's not his politics, but that's how he was viewed. So, given the fact that he is this leader of Kero, symbolic leader of Kero, you would expect that he will at least say something about the war going on in Oromia, say something about the imprisonments going on in Oromia, the humanitarian crisis going on in Oromia. Highlight at least this. Okay, the Tigray issue might be another matter. Of course, the Tigray issue he should say because it is an Ethiopian party also. So he didn't. I would not blame him for not saying many things on the things that have to be said. But even what he says is where I disagree with some of the things that he says. Is where, I mean, Oromia is completely ignored in that interview. So Oromo nationalists have a reason to be angry. And he does mention the TDF, the Tigrayan forces. He calls them TPLF invariably. But he doesn't mention about the war, the atrocities. In fact, he actually said, I'm glad that I was imprisoned because if I were free, I would have joined one or the other camp. And that wasn't, that was basically avoiding political decision. I said in my tweet, as you have seen, perhaps, it's a refusal to decide. And this might be, at least, if not complicit, it might give an impression that you are basically hypocritical. That's one point of my disagreement with him. And the second thing is that Jawar was very soft. I mean, the whole interview was directed towards the Ethio-Amhara elite to appease them, to calm them down, in fact, to woo them to support him. That's one. The second constituency, the second audience he was targeting was the international community. And here is where your question about the relationship with the United States comes in. There are people who actually say the US is grooming him. There are reasons for suspecting that, but we don't know exactly. But from what he says, it looks like, and from what we know also through other mechanisms, looks like there is some kind of gesture towards him biding his time to at least replace Abiy if eventually we come to that stage. And so he was supposed to calm them down too, because Jawar was one of those who resisted the progress of TDF and OLA to Finfinne in in December, January. And one of the people who really said that wasn't the way to go. And because of that, I think his activities and America's choices seem to be, similar. Because Americans, Abiy was mainly supported by the Americans and the international community, who has since now fallen out of love with him. But the reason they stuck with him is because they think if he's gone, the entire region will be destabilized. They needed a regional sheriff, for their international security thing. As always, the international community thinks that Ethiopia is too big to fail, and if I have to do anything to keep it together, we have to. And so they kind of they kind of want to ignore, not ignoring, but ignoring the atrocities that are being committed, the war that is being committed, the many political complications that Abiy has created. But if he is gone, they said, a worse would happen. What is that worse that would happen? Communal violence is the name. What they are basically saying is Oromos will be fighting against the Amharas. And that's what the international community, the diplomats from Canada, from the United States have been telling the Wobo TDF group. If TDF is not going to take control of the town, the city, then if OLA is going to be the one that takes control of it. And they said, we know that OLA is going to make it difficult for the Amhara non-Oromo population in the city, and that is unacceptable. And they went to the extent of asking them what plans they have to control the city, to details, and they had to give it to them. And then, of course, when a diplomat is impressed with you, because he knows a diplomat is only a diplomat, he doesn't make a decision. He has to talk back to the headquarters, the State Department, and gets back to you. And so they said, we'll get back to you. And then they stood their lines, and they had to force the TDF, the OLA group, to retreat. Now, why did that happen? They were still hoping that there will be another way of keeping Ethiopia together, in spite of all the misery, all the death, all the humanitarian issues that we face. How do we do it, they think? They say it is very complicated always. There is the Eritrean factor, and they have to make a choice between which way to go. Do we have to first depose Isaias or Abiy? It's too risky to remove Abiy before we remove Isaias. Therefore, let's calm it down. Let's try to see if we can engage with the TDF, and let's prop them to fight Eritrea. And then let's use Abiy for that, and so on and so on. There are these kinds of calculations. These kinds of dealings are everywhere. And Jawar realizes this. And he always asks, where will be the Oromo in this changing dynamics? So I think he has also extraordinary connections with the diplomats of the West, and he seems to have some thumbs up from those folks. And it looks like from his interview, it was completely directed towards them, not to the Oromo public. The Oromo is completely ignored, completely. And even in the Afan Oromo interview. And so it looks like, in my view, the attempt to address and impress, calm down the Amhara Ethio political elite in Arakilo, and the attempt to placate the restive Western countries about the possible collapse of state in that region shows that maybe he is already being groomed. And of course, you can do a discourse analysis about the whole presentation, the symbols, the flags, and the way he was composed. I know Jawar is my friend, and probably no one is closer to him than I am, about his temperament, his voice, his tone, his arguments, and all that. And for the first time, Jawar is like aloof, collected, and the voice is calm, lower tone, and speaking like he is already the prime minister. In fact, he was at one point he has to say, I will be open to discuss with Abiy, to discuss with the Federation, to discuss with this, to discuss with that. It's like, guys, I'm above the fray. I'm trying to watch you and to calm you down. You can talk to me and I can give you some solution. Now, that is very uncharacteristic of him. Now, of course, people say, well, that's OFC. No, Merera wasn't like that. A few days ago, after that interview, Merera was in the United States Embassy in Addis Ababa, and he was talking about the national dialogue thing, and he was more radical than even Jawar. Merera was basically saying, we don't accept the national dialogue thing that is in plan now. Reason, first and foremost, we don't believe that this government is capable of handling the country at this point in time. And secondly, there has to be inclusive. I mean, all the warring factions should be part of the dialogue. But first, as a precondition, the war has to stop before we begin to dialogue. And so on and so forth. So if you hear that, this one is something else. There was a deliberately pre-planned media stunt intended to appeal to a different constituency. So my disagreement with Jawar is not in what he did not say when he should have said. It is in what he said. When he talks about Eritrea, he wants to keep it in the mix of Ethiopian problems. And this is an American thing. It's not an Ethiopian thing. It's not an Oromo thing. To keep Eritrea as part of our domestic activity. That's number one. Number two, you talk about Amhara region's brigands. You know, this militia and terrorist group like the Fano. And about them, when he talks about the need to disarm the Fano, he was basically far less aggressive than even Abiy. Abiy is now at the moment having difficulty to work on how to disarm the Fano. And there is some fighting in different corners of the Amhara National Regional State. And Jawar was saying it is very difficult to try to disarm the Fano by force. Well, it wasn't difficult for him to say that Ola has to be disarmed when they were discussing the Oromo Liberation Army before. And this is where the major disagreements come from. With me, that's my kind of distaste for that interview comes from this. But of course, we cannot judge him by one interview. And now he has started a Galatoma tour to thank his supporters across the globe. He is going to Europe already, and he was going to come to North America and Australia. And we're going to see what more things he would say in different fora now to either corroborate some of the claims he made in that interview or explain and clarify those claims that he made in that interview. This way or that way, Jawar is still the anchor of the political discourse in Ethiopia. As someone said in their party congress at some point, he is silent, he speaks. He speaks, he speaks. He's silent, he's a problem. He speaks out, he's a problem. You like him, you hate him, you will be talking about him. And so that's where we are at this point in time. But I am looking forward to getting more explanation, more corroborations, more clear things about Oromo, about the nations and nationalities and peoples, all the demands in the region, in the southern region. I also, at this point in time, I preside over a civic organization trying to create solidarity among the nations in Ethiopia. It's called Solidarity of Nations in Ethiopia. And in that group, also, we want to talk to him, and we want to engage him and Bekele Gerba in their tour in North America and Australia and Europe, and we want to engage them. But before we do that, we need to hear them. First of all, we need to hear about what the party stand is. Is that Jawar or is that the party? And secondly, if Jawar has to be interrogated, it can't be based on only one interview he gave. Let's see how he pursues that line in the coming days when he faces the Oromo public. Maybe that's the right forum to hear about what he thinks about Oromo politics. And in the Solidarity of Nations and in the United Front, we'll have a joint meeting, we hope. We are going to also listen to them asking about what their vision is for the nations, including for the problem in Tigray. And how about the Eritrean issues? How about the issue of transitional and transformational justice? How about this genocidal madness? How do we ensure accountability? How do we, these things have to be cleared out. Of course, you can't answer all these questions in one interview. So we have to wait, suspend judgment for a moment, and wait until he has different fora, different opportunity to explain, corroborate, or deflect from those claims that we could hear so far from the last interview.
Thank you. On that point, I think we heard there is a feeling that the interviews, both the Amharic and the Afan Oromo one, they looked like scripted ones, the same questions, the same order, all that. But one point that we want to make from UMD Media's perspective is we want also to speak to Jawar himself and ask him the kind of questions that we are receiving from our viewers as well. There is just a very short question, short answer on that point. A viewer asked your view on his interview that you shared on social media, among others, on Twitter. The viewer says, Oromo elites opposing your view. And then the question is from the viewer, is your view shared by other prominent Oromo activists as well?
I
So,
suppose so. I
right.
like
So,
to believe that because obviously, whether they share it or not, it has become a point of discussion. I mean, the entire nation is talking about it now. And there is campaigns and counter campaigns of, smear campaigns and counter campaigns. It's like the Oromo world has been divided on a very pivotal issue, but this is not about an important aspirational or strategic or big political issue. It's not that kind of difference. But people have their own level of understanding there. And one of the things that has happened in Ethiopia's politics is, um, someone you think is important should not be criticized. And to criticize, who the hell are you? That kind of thing has been the case. I've been criticizing Abiy, and everybody was saying you are jealous. Literally, you are jealous. That's all. The difference between you and Abiy is, how can you be railing against Abiy? And then look at what happened. Even from the very get-go, when he went to Eritrea and had a peace deal, I said, I want to see the content. Because that peace deal was a war pact, and it proved to be so. It proved to be so. And so when someone comes out into the political space, he's putting out himself for criticism too, and for interrogation, for question, for accountability. And it looks like there is this sense that when someone comes out, we only should clap for him and we should just encourage him and so on and so forth. And I don't think that's the way to go. And we have paid dearly because we did that for Abiy. And of all people, Jawar, I wish him well. He's my friend. And that's why my comment is also, Jawar, you can do better and you know better. I know you know better. But people don't take it that way. And there is this problem also, this pandemic, I should say, that politics has modeled art now. It's like life has modeled art virtually. It's a celebrity thing now. And by the way, that attitude, I call it a Kim Kardashian style politics, which is done only on camera and on styles and how you pose and how many likes you get and so on and so forth over the years. That tendency has been there. And no wonder in Ethiopia, the demagogue that Abiy has also been done through mainly the media and pictures. And throughout the war season, he was pictures in uniforms and so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, I think this is also the model for the opposition. And people tend to react to images rather than content and thought and substance and so on and so forth. And as a result, whatever image, because of the celebrity politics going on, whatever social media likings you get seem to be, to justify your political moves. And once that you have that kind of support on social media, it looks like you have earned the right to keep above accountability. And I don't think that's the case. I think people should first listen to the content of what everyone says and judge them by the content of what that he says. And just because, and this is another point I want to make. I think the fact that we have oppressed groups in Ethiopia, oppressed on account of religion, oppressed on account of gender, oppressed on account of ethnicity. Sometimes when we have someone who looks like us, who symbolically seems to be ours, we find it very difficult to respond to criticize it, because once in a generation we have one among us, heading to power position. Once in a generation. And mind you, Jawar Mohammed, what he represents in Ethiopia, as I said earlier, symbolically, he is the quintessential other of the Ethiopian state. And precisely that's why he has been the most publicly vilified and attacked person in Ethiopia. And there were people who identify with him, with his name, with his national identity, who want to see. It's not what he does symbolically, to see him come to the helm of power, anxious and desperate to see that. And when you do touch that symbolic subject, people get anxious. And I did, post a couple of tweets and a couple of Facebook posts, and it looks like that is taken up by many, and that has actually started a huge conversation in the Oromo nation, and I believe there are many supporters of that idea. I mean, the questions are everyone's questions. It's not just Oromo question. It's a Sidama question. It's also a Somali, a question, a Tigrayan question. I mean, people are asking questions from everywhere. Why is Jawar like this? This is not what we expected from Jawar. And in me raising it, the Oromo public is no different. They have these questions too. The difference is, why is a guy doing this? Is he not his friend? Is the thing. Is some people still, is this the way to do it? And some people say, talk to him. Otherwise, it is not that the questions are not right. So I believe that many people are in support. In fact, many people share those concerns and those questions.
Great. Maybe we'll leave that Jawar block of this show by asking a bigger picture, given what you saw in the interview and what is happening on the ground. Maqala Asmara, potential confrontation. Actually, we have heard of some skirmishes there, battle, all that. The measures, the law and the law enforcement measures in Amhara, as the government calls it. And do you see any realignment in terms of what's happening in Oromia, or will that be just business as usual? And what do you see is happening in terms of solving the crisis in Oromia vis-a-vis the fate of OLA?
Yes, this question has been asked, and there is some anxiety among, particularly my Tagaru friends, that there seems to be a realignment of Oromo political forces, and they're afraid that there seems to be that the Oromo political forces are somehow making peace with Abiy. There is that anxiety, that fear, and there is anxiety among Oromo elite, political actors, that maybe TDF has cut a deal with Abiy and to agree with him to fight against Eritrea and so on and so forth. So there is a mutual suspicion from both sides, but I know for sure that both have a very good understanding and they are in sync with what is happening. Now, the area is very complicated and there are multiple layers of deals and attempts to negotiate at every level with Ola, with other Oromo political forces, with even the Somali groups, and with TDF. There are many levels of mediations, negotiations, and in sorting out what kind of subjects to negotiate upon: humanitarian crisis alone, political settlement, justice issue, regional security, and so on and so forth. So because there are these protracted kinds of deals trying to be cut, somehow protracted negotiations intended to bring about some kind of peace in different areas, people are a little worried about what is happening. Now, some people ask me whether Jawar's statement, very docile statement, is a way of showing Oromo has made peace with Abiy and has realigned its forces. No, that wasn't a realignment. It's a different stuff altogether. The Oromo Liberation Army and the Tigrayan Defense Force are still in collaboration. Their agreement remains intact. The UDF, the United Front of Ethiopian Federalists and Confederalist Forces, remains intact. The solidarity and the collaboration remains intact. They keep each other informed on a daily basis. I know at least the OLA and the TDF work closely. Everyone is informed about the command centers' decisions of each group. And of course, geographically, because they are far removed from each other, it's very difficult to always bring about synchronicity. They talk to each other, there is an understanding. One thing they understand and underscore above all things, both groups, is that the Tigrayan elite wants to support the Oromo people's aspirations, the Oromo people's struggle as a nation. The OLA leaders and the Oromo elite also understand the Tigrayan people's aspirations, past and present. And what they support is the Tigray people's aspirations, not just one faction, one party. And they are very careful when they talk about Tigray, they talk about TDF and the Tigrayan National Regional State Government. And they are very careful about, and the Tigrayan Defense Force leaders, they are very careful about when, about OLA and Oromo, when they talk about Oromo issues. As you have seen, the public statement they issued is a commitment to support the Oromo people's national struggle, not a particular faction. But for now, the agreement they have, the collaboration agreement they have, is with the OLA. And of course, because of this, they are actually in sync about every move they make in their operations and plans and deals and negotiations and so on and so forth, because the agreement is an agreement to support each other in technical matters, in military matters, in operational matters, logistical and material and artillery. So that remains intact. But the nature of war, the war going on, the attack that's coming to each, the nature of humanitarian difficulty they both live in determines the nature of responses they make against the government. And so you don't see everything going in the same way, because in Tigray, for example, at this point in time, the Ethiopian government is not fighting them, is not engaging with them. In Oromia, the Ethiopian government is fighting against Ola in full force. In Tigray, there are some kinds of discussions about negotiations and so on, humanitarian access for people who are exposed to humanitarian crisis and so on and so forth. You don't see that in Oromia because their life is more dire and difficult there, and there is no hope of, there is no interest on the part of the regime to discuss with Oromo political leaders. Actually, when Abiy discusses the issue of the war in Oromia with Oromo leaders, other than the OLA, he says, support me, help me to eradicate OLA. That's how it goes. And that puts other political leaders suspect in the eyes of the Oromo public, especially in the Oromo diaspora. So this is how he is dealing with it. So the response is also the same. So because of the nature of the attack, the responses are different. Because the responses are different, we think that there is no synchronicity between the two, but they are still working together, as I said, in everything, because they support each other's aspirations, the people's aspirations, not just the Oromo people and the Tigrayan people, but also the people of Ethiopia, the oppressed peoples in particular, the different nationalities which form the United Front as a political force. Because they support the aspirations of these populations, we believe that the right to self-determination is given priority. We believe that they say the regaining of collective agency is a priority. We believe that removing or eradicating this neo-fascistic regime that is in Finfinne is a priority, and that's where the collaboration actually starts. And they believe that there is a political commitment and preparation to address the questions, the outstanding questions of the nations in Ethiopia, the demands of the Tigrayan people for a referendum to determine their destiny, the demands of the Oromo people to determine their destiny and to regain their collective agency, the demands of the various nations in Ethiopia, in the southern half of Ethiopia, to at least have a right to self-governance through having their own states, and on and on. And if this is the kind of thing that they are trying to work on. And I think they are working on that very well. And of course, there should have been a more concerted, more synchronized uh, public relations work they should have done through the United Front. And as Solidarity of Nations, of course, we press them hard on this, and they are doing their best. And in fact, we will be having a strong, long meeting with them, hopefully this weekend or the coming one. So, so there is an understanding and a mutual recognition of each other's aspirations, and there is an attempt to work together, to intensify the attempt to work together, actually. And yeah, that's where they are.
Great. There was actually a block of questions on Oromo, Tigrayan elite, and so on, but you alluded to that in different ways. So I will just run through the questions I received, and you can,
Select.
emphasize, select, because you mentioned a number of them. So one question is, do you think there is enough discussion happening between Oromo and Tigrayan elite? That's the first question. And then there is, what do you think should be done to strengthen the ties between the two elites? That's another question I received. And then there is about media. So do you think there is enough?
Okay,
There,
no.
there is enough media presence of Tigrayan elite or political figures in Oromo media? That's one question. And the last on the under the same block from another viewer is, how much do you think? That's, I think you mentioned that in terms of aspiration, do each know the other's aspiration, and how, if there is this know-how or recognition, how could this be translated into some genuine efforts? This is a block of questions on the same topic. You mentioned a number of them, but you can emphasize or respond to that.
Yeah. Is there enough discussion between the two groups, the elites on both sides? I don't think so. Is there a discussion? Yes. Is it enough? No. And is the discussion that we have public? Not as much as we wanted it to be. And I think this is part of the problem of disorientation that the Oromo public have experienced, and some people are indecisive, especially people who have had lots of trauma from the times of the TPLF-led EPRDF. They seem to find it difficult for them to accept that now they side with TDF and TPLF, etc. As a result of that disorientation, they understand that the TDF cause is a right one. They actually said this is what has been happening to us and so on. But because of that disorientation, the Oromo elite is also a little shy of public engagement with the Tagaru elite, public engagement, public support for the cause of Tigray, especially in the area of humanitarian needs and so on and so forth. Otherwise, anyone who has some sense in him understands that it is important, and they understand, as I said, the elite understand each other's problems very well. As I said, the Oromo elite understands the Tigrayan aspirations, past and present, especially in the changing aspirations. This generation of Tagaru want to make sure that they determine their destiny by themselves, and we do understand that aspiration too, and the younger generation's aspirations has to be taken into account. And of course, there is an easy solution for all that, and that's not a problem. But are we other regarding in every decision we make? Apart from being self-regarding, apart from looking at the other in order to advance our own interests, beyond that, are we also other regarding is a good question to ask. But that question, I think, has to be discussed more and hammered out by a more open, more public, a freer kind of engagement. At this point in time, there seems to be shying away And you are right, someone I said that there is no enough presence of the Tigrayan elites on Oromo media outlets. And I don't think that is for lack of readiness on the part of the Tigrayan elite. It's perhaps the Oromo media institutions slightly, dragged back, pulled back because of the disorientation in our public. Otherwise, the readiness on the part of the Oromo elite to appear on Tigrayan media outlets is similarly meager, similarly small, as you know. You can count a handful of them, including myself. Myself is a Kirbit, and I don't know how many more you have seen on TMH or on UMD or anywhere. It's Adala I saw on this media outlet. Very few people actually are seen, and because of one of the funny things I have observed lately is that when I posted those tweets, someone said, you are the owner of TMH. What the hell do you know about Oromo? Shut the hell up. Um, and that's because I have appeared at least twice in a year. Twice in a year. And I speak about Oromo, mind you. I come here, I am asked about Oromo. But then the mere fact that I appeared on those media outlets makes me a servant of TPLF, a servant of junta. They call us junta scholars. And so you can see where this is, the kind of sentiment behind in the ordinary public. And because of this, people kind of shy away and become guarded about what to speak where and where to appear itself. And I believe that I am not a representative of any political party. I don't have a line to respect. I like to believe that I'm a public intellectual who while to speak truth to power, wherever, whenever, and in whatever opportunity we find. And I wasn't speaking on Tigrayan media outlets when I was speaking about Tigray's situation, Sidama's situation, in an Oromo rally, in an exclusively Oromo rally in Melbourne, several times. And it was only after that we could manage to link up the two groups to organize rallies together and so on and so forth. But there is that sense of mutual suspicion, a past that has not been dealt with, a past that has not been bilaterally dealt with and resolved. And there are people who could not step over to the other side without resolving that issue of the past. So I understand that. I'm not going to blame anybody for that. But it depends on your situation, your political position, the political aspiration you have. If you are an independent, I like to call myself still a scholar, an independent student of Ethiopian constitutional law who like to speak what he thinks is good for everyone. You can speak out whenever, wherever, about anything. But not many people are as privileged as I am, so I understand people's reservations. But there is, I believe, enough understanding. There is, I believe, a discussion between the two groups. There is, I believe, a media presence of one on the other, but that is not enough. That's not public enough. It's not enough. It's not public enough. It's not political enough. But on the other hand, I, for example, have been approached by the Tigrayan Professionals and Scholars Society and almost all media outlets, including the government's media outlets in the country. And whenever I can arrange, the time zone is a little difficult, as you know. I'm willing to appear there and work with them, with anyone for that matter. I think it is worth the while to push the idea of collective rights in Ethiopia. I believe that's where most of the problems of the country are still becoming a knot. And I believe it is important for us to work in solidarity and standing for my rights is also standing for others' rights. I'm not insular, I believe. And in a time when genocidal forces are making cross-border collaboration and fighting Ethiopian peoples by inviting foreign mercenaries, and I like what Alex Dval once said, there is an increasing mercenarization of the politics of the Horn of Africa. And I think it's Alex Dval or John Young, one of them, who said there is an increasing mercenarization of the politics of the Horn of Africa. And if there is that mercenarization, cross-border collaboration and solidarity to attack the different groups of peoples in Ethiopia, then I think it is up to the Ethiopian peoples to also join hands and fight the same enemy and march towards the same strategic goals and enjoy the same kinds of, demand the same kinds of rights. It is in that spirit that we facilitate the work of the Solidarity of Nations. It's in that spirit that in our civic organization, we try to act like a forum, a platform for the United Front. It's in that spirit that we support all activists that put up some kind of resistance against Abiy Ahmed's regime.
Okay, thank you. And the parting question for today would be a question I received, two questions actually related. One is about your belief. The viewer says, you used to believe in continuity of democratic and prosperous Ethiopia. Did you lose this hope of continuity of democratic Ethiopia? That's one question. And then on the general where to, or what would be next is, the viewer asks, is nonviolent separation of the nations, including Oromia, feasible? What are the pros and cons of hoping for nonviolent separation? That would be the parting question for today, Dr. Zagay.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's also personal a bit. For a long time, I had a particular kind of constitutional legal scholarship, particular project. That project is called Redemptive Constitutional Practice. A redemptive constitutional practice can rebuild Ethiopia, can demilitarize politics in the Horn of Africa, can bring about democracy and a just order, an equitable order, and can, as a result, bring about a lasting peace among the nations. And tons of writings on that issue. I was a huge believer in the hope of redemption. Now the question is, do you still believe in that redemptive project? I don't. Is it possible? Yes. Is it desirable? I don't know. At some point it was. But after the leading Ethio-Amhara political class have preferred to side with foreign elements instead of to destroy their own people, instead of recognizing rights of recognizing the rights of the collective groups in the country. If the Ethiopian political class as a whole, this includes politicians, scholars, artists, prophets, ministers, church ministers, or even mosque leaders and all, if the entire Ethiopian political class mobilizes all its resources and borrows outside resources to demonize and kill one of its own, I think it looks like they are not giving the other people a chance to redeem Ethiopia. They are not. And the possibility was there, and I still believe that it is possible, but I'm not so sure of the desirability. By aligning with Eritrea, for example, by aligning with outside forces, aligning with anyone who is against the different nations and nationalities and peoples in Ethiopia, including Putin. People have been enrolled to fight for Putin against Ukraine, mind you. If this is Ethiopia, how do you think a Sidama person, or a Tagaru person, a Tigrayan person, or an Oromo person would desire to mend the broken pieces and to rebuild Ethiopia. And I now fear that while it is possible, a democratized, fairer, multinational, multi-foundational, multicultural Ethiopia is possible, but it's not desirable at this point in time. Because whenever I talk about it, for example, the Tagaru public doesn't have completely lost hope on this. Nah, it's too late for us. And the Oromo, they always are very clear. The Oromo is very clear. We have a struggle for Oromo self-determination. And we don't care a bit about what becomes of Ethiopia. That's not my issue. I first have to gain my own justice, and then I will think about the other thing. So redemption for the large majority of Oromos is a second order issue. And I remember when I was teaching at the University of Addis Ababa, I go to this LLM classes, master's classes, human rights law, where I teach minority rights, constitutional law, where I teach human rights under the Ethiopian constitution, and so on and so forth. And in my interaction with these graduate school students, I sometimes find these hardcore issues that are still exercising the country. And I come and share it with them, with my friends over lunch. And they say, you deal with these kinds of things in the classroom? I say, yeah. Maltu sigalch. Maltu sigalche wanganda sana. Yes, why are you even talking about it? Why is this important to you? This is not our cause, And I say, I got this kind of criticism. I say, bug. That's well deserved, because in the first place, why is that your issue at all? Back then, I used to laugh it off and say, "This guy's, oh, come on, you're too cynical." But now I realize that it is another way of saying, like, look, for the subject peoples of Ethiopia, the issue of redeeming Ethiopia is a second-order question. In other words, it's only after ensuring my survival, my recognition of my identity, assurance of the fact that I can determine my destiny by myself, or at least can live as an equal partner within the Ethiopian polity after the genocidal attacks have stopped, then I will be dealing with that issue of with whom I want to live to become a prosperous, democratic, etc. country or not. Okay? So that's the second order question. Now I have a problem, and the problem is killing me. And I have to first fight the actor that is trying to kill me, is the question. So because people are at this point now, I doubt, while there is still the possibility, I doubt the desirability among many of the publics in Ethiopia. Secondly, on my part personally, I've gone a long way from where I used to be. In 2015, I think Sadale, your colleague, your friend, would remember, I used to regularly write on Addis Standard. At some point, I wrote in 2017, actually, I wrote the piece on the redemption, constitutional redemption. And that piece has been only unpublished until today. And in that piece, I start with a poem from 1898 about a guy who was in love with his wife, walking in the night under, in a shining, bright moon, and it was beautiful. They loved each other so much, and they stop while walking. They stop at a point and they hug each other, and he realizes that she is pregnant. And then they walk a bit more, and she tells him, it's not your son. He was so happy. They're so in love, but she just told him that that's not his son. So in other words, the child is a product of an infidel wife, having an affair with another, a bad affair, let's just say that. What does he do? So the story goes, he in fact hugs her and embraces her with a firmer brace. And there is someone, a cultural studies scholar, who comments on this, and he says, I will share the writing later, perhaps, with the poem and so on. He says, this is the difficulty, the dilemma of the post-colonial African, the post-colonial third world person. Why? There is this colonial powers, there is this nation state that is created and inherited to them, bequeathed to them by the colonial empire, by colonial international law. And there is this African elite, independentist, decolonizing elite, who has to do with this illegitimate child. The state form is a colonial child, a product of colonialism. He is an anti-colonialist, but he has to do something about it. It is born of, for example, any of the African nations, Kenya, Nigeria, etc. They are born of an illegitimate affair. How were they born? Because of the British colonial imperial expansion. So the state form that we have in Africa or in South Asia are basically bastards, if you don't mind my word. And how do you father a bastard is the question. And I picked that poem and I said there could be some issues of legitimacy around the constitution. There is obviously a fundamental question about the way the Ethiopian state is formed. How do we deal with this bastard? Are there ways? And I used to talk about redemptive constitutional practices, and therefore I identify different constitutional practices today, which we can use to rectify the problem of the past and enhance the possibility of going towards better polity, towards democracy, peace, and so on and so forth. Now, that hope is dashed for me personally on the night Hachalu Hundeza was assassinated. Jawar Mohammed was arrested arbitrarily, and Ethiopians came out in droves to public square and said, Hachalu is done. Now Jawar remains. And I think these are the most modest Ethiopianists that had optimism about redeeming the empire. And with the days of Hachalu Hundeza, for me, the hope of redemption also died. So that's where I am at this point in time. I still believe and understand in my mind that redemption is possible. I am not sure it is desirable. On my part, I have no desire because it's too much a cost to pay. And if I regain my desire, it will be a second order question. First, remove the hurdle, remove the problem of the people, stop the killing, stop the genocide, stop the humanitarian crisis, arrest the humanitarian crisis, relieve people, bring relief people, then restore their decisional competence, their collective agency. Then the people will have to deal with their bastard, not me, not anymore. So to allow the people to deal with their bastard, one of the things we kind of pushed the TDF OLA group to look forward to in terms of roadmap was to come up with, once they depose Abiy Ahmed's regime, to come up with a provisional government that will enact, under the auspices of the Constitution, a referendum act to show that there is a commitment to address the people's demands, outstanding historic demands as well as contemporary demands. So personally, I don't see the desirability. And if there is a desirability, it's a second order question. But intellectually, in my mind, it is a possibility. And in terms of the idea of rebuilding Ethiopia on the basis of a new just solidarity, I will work for that. And that's precisely why I am very active in the Solidarity of Nations, in the group called Solidarity of Nations, a civic organization that's established in the United States about 2 years ago, and which is up and kicking alive at this point in time. The other question was, what was it? Sorry.
The other question was related to the whether it's possible for a non-violent separation of the nations, including Oromia, if it's still feasible, and what
Yeah,
are the pros and cons?
yeah, that's a very terrific question. That's a very big question. I believe any kind of separation, if it is going to happen, has to be peaceful. It can't be violent. Now, of course, any state creation is by nature intrinsically violent because it's putative. It's creation of a new boundary. It's breaking of old boundaries, and so on and so forth. No question about it. Relationships are cut off, new relationships emerge, and those relationships have to have their own boundaries. And because of that, it's tumultuous, and there is a tremor that hits you whenever there is cessation. However, if separation is not peaceful, it's not worth it, to be honest. And this is precisely why, and this is what the Ethiopians don't understand about Article 39. Article 39, they say, is a divisive provision. Article 39 is a guarantee for peaceful divorce. Article 39 does not disallow separation, but it regulates separation. If you are a true anti-colonialist, in fact, you would realize that it is not strong kind of posturing in terms of undoing an empire. So Article 39 is basically seen by the Ethiopianist class, political class, as a divisive element. I believe it is, number one, a uniting point because it guarantees equality at home and peace abroad. I mean, equality together when we are together and peace when we are apart. That's basically what it does. And this is basically what they don't get about that provision. The provision actually makes it possible to live equally and in peace together with each other, but to part in peace if we have to. And so there is no separation that has to be done violently. This is why, as I said earlier, when we pushed the TDF, OLA, United Front group towards a roadmap, we said one of the things that we have to do, A, to restore collective agency, B, to build confidence and trust, and C, to show where you stand in terms of your political commitment about the outstanding questions of the peoples in Ethiopia. You have to come up with a proposal to enact a referendum law, a referendum act, which will determine the processes, the timelines, the institutions that manage the demands of self-determination at a district level, at a state level, at a zonal level, at a state level, and at a regional level. So this is the way to do it. If you have that referendum act, then it will detail the rules and regulations with which we can regulate separation, regulate, administer self-determination. All that is needed. Why? Because we want to make the separation, if it has to come, peaceful. Why is that important? Because this is also part of the self-determination thing, even in the United Nations. And forget the international community, forget the United Nations, but within Ethiopia, for example, when you separate, there comes the issue of borders. There comes the issue of transboundary populations, meaning people who have dual identity in the border areas. There comes the issue of minorities that will be cut off from their major group elsewhere. There will be issues of liquidation of assets. I mean, after every divorce, there is a matter of liquidation of assets. Meaning we have been together means you have the same resources that you have shared, institutions that you have built together, and what does happen to them? And then you have obligations that you have taken over from the international community, because you took those responsibilities, financial debts, for example, different treaty obligations in multilateral organizations as well as bilateral relations. You have commitments you have committed yourself to as Ethiopia. When you go apart, do you take that burden with you, or do you just shrug it off and hope to be a member of the international community? If you don't want to, you can't hope to shrug it off and become a respectable international member of the international community if you want to recognition. Then what you have to do is you have to discuss with the rump state about how much of the burden you take, how much of the privilege also you take with you, and how much of the burden you leave to the rump state. And all these things have to be sorted out. And whoever talks about self-determination in that regulated referendum procedure has to bring these things to the table and campaign for it so that people can analyze and make a cost-benefit analysis of staying in or leaping out and make a decision. It's an arduous, long process. It requires an institution building, norm building, campaigning and educating and sensitizing people. People have to be given clear choices. I mean, in any election, people have to be first given clear choices. But in a referendum, to determine your destiny in particular, you need to have a clear choice. And the choices have to be honestly and transparently be presented to the people so that people can freely decide. When they did that, they will also take the responsibility for the peace and war that might come about after they become independent. And I think that is possible. And I don't think that it is so much of a problem, in particular in Ethiopia, because there is an article, a constitutional article that regulates separation if it comes to that, but that actually gives a guarantee that people will not go back to the prison house that Ethiopia has been and is at this point in time. And that I think there is a way to do it, but it really requires a lot of work and a lot of confidence building, trust building, and a lot of leadership as well, and open and direct politics, transparent politics, rather than politics that operates on the basis of conspiracy theory, and that's what's ruining us at this point in time.
Great, thank you so much for your insightful contribution. We have been live on a number of platforms, and many were interacting. Actually, the number of questions I received were not only this, but I think we should finish it today here. And the hope is the conversation continues on all platforms by the people. And we will also bring you and others back to UMD Media for more insightful discussions on this subject and others related to it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Getachew. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Great. You have been following us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. This was the conversation with Dr. Zagay Ararsa. And the subject matter for today was the state of play in Oromia and beyond. We covered a number of questions we received from our viewers. We thank our viewers, and please, on your way out, like, share, subscribe, so that those who have missed this live show can watch it at the later time. Bye from here. Good night.